Hello, my name is Ari Redboard, Head of Legal and Government Affairs at TRM Labs. Welcome to TRM Talks. TRM Talks is brought to you by TRM Labs, the leading provider of blockchain intelligence and anti-money laundering software. We have a truly awesome show for you today. But before I dig in, a couple really sort of key points. One, there's a Q&A. We really encourage questions, and this is really a fantastic panel to sort of answer those. So please put them in to the Q&A, and we will do our best to get to most or all of them. There is a handouts tab. Please check it out. There are a couple really key, cool handouts from some of our speakers today, but also some information about our next TRM Talks, which is going to be really cool, involving OFAC and sanctions compliance on November 3rd. Finally, I could not be more excited about this, but we are a podcast now. So please go back over the last 2 years, almost exactly to this day, we've done many TRM Talks with really fantastic people. We're now on Apple and Spotify, so please check those out. And finally, there's going to be a survey towards the end of our session. Please go ahead and fill that out for us. You are the ones who drive our content. You decide sort of what we talk about. So please, that feedback is so valuable. So really excited to dig into this panel today. Look, over the last year or so, we really have seen an explosion of activity across Latin America in the digital asset space, from El Salvador to Argentina, Mexico to Brazil and Colombia. We have seen an incredibly diverse and complex and really evolving regulatory landscape, and really just incredibly honored to have what I consider the perfect panel of experts to discuss crypto regulation and compliance in Latin America. So really, without further ado, I want to introduce really this outstanding lineup. Mariano Federici, who's the Senior Managing Director K2 Integrity and former chair of the Egmont Group of FIUs and head of the FIU for Argentina. I mean, are you kidding me? Who else do you want to talk to about regulation in Latin America? Celeste Pli, head of compliance for Argentina for Bitso. Eric Rincon Cardenas, former president of the Colombia FinTech Association and director of TIC at University of Rosario. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Just incredibly honored to have you. So,
thank you.
Before we dig into crypto regulation in Latin America, you all three of you have really the most extraordinary backgrounds. Would love to kind of hear about your journeys to crypto and to the space as we kick things off. Celeste, can I kick things off with you? First of all, I have to say you probably have the coolest background that anyone has ever had on a TRM talk. So thank you for that. And would love to hear.
We promote fun compliance at Bitso, definitely.
Exactly. Compliance is fun. That's what I've been saying for TRM Talks on TRM Talks for 2 years. Compliance is fun. Yes. So let's have some fun today.
Sure. Okay. Thanks so much, Ari and TRM Labs, for the invitation. Just to give you a little bit of my background, and I'm going to try to be short because clearly we have a lot of great stuff to cover today. So I'm a lawyer. I started my career as a judiciary clerk in the federal courts when I was in university. There I got exposure to all the aspects of investigations of federal crimes, such as drug trafficking, corruption, and so on. But my experience there showed me the kind of inefficiency of the justice system in Argentina. You can imagine that we have only 30 money laundering convictions after 22 years of the AML law. So this kind of took me to question myself and say, like, where do I want to take my career? And that took me to the compliance sector, because I felt that the fact of creating a safe and sound financial system within Argentina could make a much better contribution, to society. So later on, I got my master's in the US and came back to Argentina to work at the FIU with my praised colleague and friend Mariano, where he mentored me, and it was an amazing time there. I worked in the supervision department, where we were dealing with all the applicable regulation and all the on-site, off-site supervision of reporting entities. And that experience on the regulator side of things was complemented by my years in the traditional financial system services industry, There I had my earliest crypto cases where we started seeing a lot of P2P transactions in the financial system, banking system. But in those early days, we weren't really sure what it was, how to deal with it. So you can imagine that a lot of account closures and de-risking was involved there. And now finally, a few years, multiple courses and positions after, I'm super aimed at working on understanding our crypto users, creating customer-centric solutions to protect, my company, and also complying with local and international regulations, but also being a business enabler. No, and I think this part is super, super important, because as compliance need to be super mindful that we are there to help the business, promote the business, and make our companies grow in a very responsible way.
That is really extraordinary, and I'm not sure I fully appreciated that entire background. I obviously am very biased, but going from prosecutor to regulator to compliance, that is that's very much my sweet spot, and like really just an extraordinary background. Eric,
I like to think. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, please go. Yeah.
I like to think I'm a millennial. I can't stay still in one place.
You have the right background for it too. That's awesome. Eric, would love to hear about your journey to the space. Obviously, you have been such a leader in sort of academia and in the sort of broader industry space. Would you talk a little bit about your journey?
Yeah, of course, Ari. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Eric Rincon Cárdenas. My approach to the crypto universe is mainly based on my experience in my firm. I have a practice in IT law and my position as former president of Colombia FinTech. It's well known, Colombia is one of the countries with more crypto assets exchange in the region, and therefore the interest of always being at the forefront with a topic of such an important relevance for the country.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I think one thing that we're going to do today, which I'm really excited about, is sometimes we sort of have like a broader overview, which we're going to get to in a moment. But I'm really excited to dig in on each of these different countries and sort of the way they're really thinking about crypto, because there's so much diversity. Mariano, I mean, quite frankly, like when I think about the region and the really true subject matter expertise, you are who I go to sort of really understand what's happening. Would love to kind of hear about your journey and your background to this space.
Thanks, Ari, and thanks for the generous comments and compliments, undeserved, by the way. But well, for me, look, I've been in this field of compliance, anti-money laundering, counter-financial crimes for the past 25 years. Started out on these issues also as a lawyer, Argentine lawyer with a master's here in the U.S. at UVA. And then, ended up working for the IMF when the International Monetary Fund received its mandate to focus on anti-money laundering and counter-terrorist financing issues right after 9/11. And my responsibility, which I think is relevant to this talk, was, to work with regulators in Latin America and the Caribbean in putting together AML CFT regimes across the region. So with just a few exceptions, of countries that didn't really want to work with the fund, I'd say, we really worked with most of the Latin countries and had a lot of exposure with regulators. In 2015, I was dragged by President Macri in Argentina with the honor, to be honest, to run the FIU there. It was a true honor also to work with an amazing team, which included Celeste. And you forgot to mention, Celeste, that apart from being my director of supervision, you were also my chief of staff at the end of the journey there. So she's awesome. And, I had the honor also of being chosen by my peers to chair the Egmont group of FIUs, which is the international body that brings them all together. And I think it was at that right moment where, the FATF was beginning to discuss also the development of international standards for virtual assets. I had an important international position, so I participated a lot in those discussions in the relevant working groups. The Egmont Group itself, FIUs were, well, what can we do about this? And, I remember my first instinctive reaction was, well, we have to reach out to the private sector here. We need to engage. We need to have dialogue. I remember, choosing some key participants, including the Libra Association at that time, which they were involved in the stablecoin development, but others as well. And just engaging in dialogue, public-private dialogue, to try to understand what was going on, where we were at, and how we could tackle it as regulators. But it wasn't until I joined K2 Integrity, the firm that I'm currently working as senior managing director, that we started really working with governments and with the private sector in tackling these issues more deeply as the industry matured and systems began to advance in their development. And it's been a fantastic journey. I've become a true fan of this space and of its potential to really revolutionize financial systems and to change the world for the better. So it's a pleasure to be here with you guys this morning.
Really excited to have you. And let me stay with you a second. I think that sort of the Egmont Group role, plus sort of your role now at K2 advising clients in the region, allows you sort of a bird's eye view. So before we sort of dig in, I think, to sort of country specific questions around regulation, could you give us a little bit of a lay of the land when it comes to sort of Latin America in crypto regulation?
Absolutely. So, I think LATAM, and I would say the Caribbean as well, is really emerging as the frontier of digital currency innovation and uptake to a way. It's home to the world's first operational central bank digital currency that in the Bahamas, as you know, the Bahamas sand dollar. That's why I wanted to include the Caribbean as well. And to the world's first Bitcoinized economy in El Salvador. And we're seeing also very high adoption rates in key markets like Argentina, my country, Brazil, and Mexico. So what's happening? I mean, what explains this expansion? I think, on the one side, there are large segments of the Latin population that remain unbanked. The traditional banking system in most Latin countries has found ways of being incredibly profitable, but targeting narrow customer segments and doing business with governments with little incentives to enhance financial inclusion, which is a key mission that I truly believe in, related with enhancement of the integrity of financial systems. And this problem has been accentuated by systemic de-risking behaviors resulting from external pressures as well, particularly in correspondent banking relationships. So, end result, a large number of people have been excluded from a financial life in most of our countries in the region. In some countries, more than 30% of the population is unbanked. Now, at the same time, Latin America has one of the largest levels of digitization and smartphone penetration in the world. Almost 80% of the population holds a smartphone with internet access, So most of these people that are unbanked are at the same time, connected and have the ability to operate financially through their phones. And this offers a great opportunity, for fintechs, for digital assets, for crypto. Another factor I think that influences and that explains the growth of crypto in the region is the instability in some of the economies in Latin America, which has created incentives for nationals in Latin countries to seek protection in crypto, wealth protection. There are several regimes, that I'm not going to go into that political topic, but that are leaning towards the autocratic model, if not dictatorships in some cases, and that represent a serious threat, to property rights, to fundamental freedoms, But there has also been a recent political trend, even in democratic countries, towards government with a more, let's say, socialist inclination, which have generated, some economic and financial stability concerns. I'm talking about countries engaged in, overspending, which is leading to high deficits, monetary expansion to cover up such deficits, which is leading to high inflation, which is a huge factor, and the loss of purchasing power resulting from inflation that is leading to distrust in national currencies. So the volatility in national currencies that is leading to also, countries having to resort to exchange controls, it creates this kind of like vicious cycles that people want to fly away from, driving consumer interest, into alternatives to local fiat currencies, and especially stable coins and crypto. Recent polls, Ari, indicate that an average of 8% of Latin consumers have already purchased cryptocurrency. The number may be even larger in places like Argentina or Venezuela, where the inflation has really accelerated the pace. Reckon that Argentina, we're expecting 100% inflation this year by the end of the year. So think of that. Most interesting, an average of like 20% has expressed interest in purchasing crypto, but has not done so yet. These are the so-called curious consumers. Altogether, this adds up to nearly 25%, a fourth of financial consumers. This means that crypto is gaining real traction very quickly in Latin America.
What's so crazy about that number is the population is so large. So when you're talking about a 25% of enormous numbers, we're talking about a lot of people here potentially.
A lot of people, and taking into account that some of the largest economies are the ones that have generated more traction, like Brazil, Argentina, Mexico as well, Colombia. So it's not just in the smallest little Caribbean islands where this is happening. We're talking about the largest economies in the region. I'll just say one last thing, which I think is interesting in terms of what is it that is holding these curious investors or potential investors back? Why are there not more people jumping into crypto more aggressively? And some of the main concerns, they include, of course, the lack of knowledge, which is why these kind of webinars are important. Education is important. Financial literacy and crypto literacy is very important. Of course, price volatility is also another reason. Many people are concerned with the volatility of the market, although they're more concerned with the volatility of fiat currencies in places like Argentina, like my country. Of course, security concerns, fraud, theft, and also the uncertainty about government regulations are reasons that are holding people back. And we're going to talk about that and dig into the regulatory landscape in a minute. I'll pause here, Eric.
Fantastic, Mariano. Celeste, I'm going to ask you specifically to sort of talk about the regulatory landscape in Argentina. But before I do, Eric, I feel like some of Mariano's comments, I saw you nodding your head, which always means to me like you might have a couple thoughts. And this is very much exactly what you think about every day. I know that, really sort of like what are the factors going into sort of adoption in the region in Colombia. Can you talk a little bit about sort of any additional sort of thoughts on that?
Yeah, there are some specific regulatory frameworks for cryptocurrency exchange activity, starting with the definition that some institutions have established cryptocurrencies or crypto assets, as defined by the central bank here in Colombia. Cryptocurrencies here in Colombia are intangible assets. Under this definition, the tax authority and others organizations in the field have established the cases in which a transaction with the cryptocurrencies is subject to pay taxes. It is worth noting that DIAN here in Colombia is the tax authority, has established that cryptocurrencies must be declared as part of an individual of individuals' assets, and companies must include them in their accounting statement. Besides that, it is recognized that the sales and purchase of crypto assets is subject to certain taxes, such as the one known in Colombia as tax of occasional gain. Also, in case of receiving payments in cryptocurrencies, paying goods and service with cryptocurrencies, receiving donations and exchanging crypto pairs, it is subject to the payment of some taxes, depending on the case. Regarding to money laundering control, it already has a regulatory framework in the industry. All activities related to the exchange on cryptocurrencies must implement an anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing risk management system that calls SAGRILAB. Here in Colombia, we call SAGRILAB, is an anti-money laundering system. And established by the authorities this special control. Therewith, the Financial Intelligence Unit in Colombia, through a resolution issued last year, compels all companies that develop exchange activities to report operations to the entity. Finally, the Financial Superintendence of Colombia developed a pilot project whose purpose is to understand how the crypto industry works and how it is connected to financial services. This pilot was fostered by crypto exchange and banks. In such pilot project, the crypto exchange are required to implement an anti-money laundering system, and this system is like typical of financial entities. Also, they must comply with local regulation related to information security and cyber security, like policies, roles, backups, continuity plans, etc. And finally, they must also comply as any digital business in the country with regulations on consumer protection, is necessary to have a special protection of data consumer, all the data consumer law. As you can see, the industry, without having a law or a specific regulation, is already more burdened than any other industry or sector in the country in regulation terms. However, even though it's an industry that already has a regulation, it has no guarantee of operation due to the discretion of the financial entities in providing service to them. Even when fulfilling all the requirements, many banks have closed accounts to platforms that have complied all the regulations. So there is a point against the crypto industry in our country, since the financial entity could arbitrarily affect many of the companies that, in their proposal to formalize, are denied a fundamental right of economic freedom and fundamental public service for their operation, such a bank account.
Thank you so much for that. That was really helpful. I think what's so interesting about crypto is it hits so many different areas, right? I mean, you talk about anti-money laundering and consumer protection. I mean, we hear about sort of environmental regulations, right? Like there's so many aspects of this, but really appreciate sort of the Colombia piece here. Celeste, pretty much every question in the chat is asking about cool crypto compliance issues. So you're in big trouble today. But before we dig into those, Would you give us a little bit of overview on Argentina? And Mariano, would love you to jump in on that as well.
Sure. So we currently do not have a specific virtual asset service provider regulation in Argentina. This therefore has to do with the fact that we don't have the legal definition of virtual assets either, with all the legal implications that this has, and this brings many operational challenges that we're going to address further on. But just to give the context on the legal and regulatory context, there's currently a bill project that has parliamentary status that was created by the current government, and it basically proposes to amend the national anti-money laundering law, which includes several modifications, and amongst them it includes the virtual asset definition, very aligned with the FATF standards. And also the definition of virtual asset service providers, and it also brings the VASPs into the AML reporting entity status. So basically, it gives the crypto world a legal hierarchy in Argentina. And this bill is being pushed because we supposedly are going to have a FATF mutual evaluation next year, so 2023, and maybe Mariano can comment on that. But just to close up the idea, due to this regulatory gap that we have in practice, because this has practical implications for us that are in the business and in the industry. So most virtual asset service providers have to very frequently have to search for frameworks within the traditional financial legislation that is already there, that will allow them to provide services to their users in a safe and regulated way. And also because otherwise it would be very hard for us to get banking partners locally. And this is something that we can touch upon a little bit more later on. However, these regulatory frameworks, the traditional frameworks, most of the times do not suffice, or they cannot be stretched in their legal interpretation to fit these new technologies. And this is where the self-regulation comes in. So in terms of AML, most VASPs in Argentina are kind of currently voluntarily complying with the local AML FIU regulation, which is originally created to regulate a different business model that has to do with card issuers and card operators. So you're thinking, what does crypto have to do with card issuers? And it's totally different industries, different businesses, different standards. So this is mainly like one of the big challenges we have. So in practice, again, what we have is that pretty much we're going to have international companies that have local subsidiaries with the fiat part of operations in place for the local part. So in this context of regulatory gaps, and I hope that was clear enough, in this context of regulatory gaps and legal complexities, it is that we have to perform our compliance magic. Sounds fun, huh?
That was incredibly clear, and really raises, I think, the biggest issue. And this is not a Latin America issue alone, right? How do we comply, or how do we build out a compliance program when we are unsure of the regulatory frameworks? We sometimes refer to this as skating to where the puck is headed. We're in Latin America today, so we could talk about running to where the ball is kicked. But regardless, I think it's a real challenge for compliance officers. We're going to dig into all of that with you, Celeste, in a moment, because I think that's really the heart of this. And I think it's very clear that we have a lot of folks in the compliance space who really want to hear from you about how you do that. What are the nuts and bolts of that? But before we do, Mariano, any other sort of additional thoughts on Argentina in particular? Just, obviously having run the FIU there and really been very much part of the compliance community.
Sure. I mean, look, I'd say, as Celeste mentioned, the lack of a legal framework, of a law giving base to the development, legal base to the development of regulations, really is creating uncertainty, generating challenges for the private sector in the development of their compliance programs, and preventing the relevant agencies, the competent authorities, including the FIU, from exercising their duties in terms of truly mitigating and the risks and going after money laundering operations in connection with virtual assets. So I think there is definitely a need for a legislative package to pass and regulations to be enacted. I sometimes get blamed for not having done that while I was in office. People say, why didn't you leave us with a law and a regulation when you were there? Well, first of all, I was not this is Argentina is a democracy, it's a republic. The head of the FIU doesn't pass laws, so that had to be approved by Congress, and we didn't have majority in Congress, unfortunately, to achieve that.
Let me stop you right there. Let me ask you this, because I think there's a question in the chat, and you're uniquely positioned to answer it, and that is, look, in the U.S. there's a comprehensive framework for crypto that's sort of been announced in the Congress. And I think the reality is it's very unlikely to get passed anytime soon based on the political environment. There's a question around sort of, Celeste mentioned, and you just mentioned specific legislation. In your mind, what are the chances, if any, just of the political will or the political strength being there to get that type of legislation anytime soon in Argentina?
Look, I think there are chances because the fact that Argentina is very close to having to undergo a mutual evaluation could really bring the political forces together to get this job done. The fact that the bill was introduced by the current government, which people would have feared was probably going to be the more resistant one to regulate, is a good thing. But of course, I think the law could definitely benefit from improvements, from amendments. And so there will have to be a debate, a discussion, a negotiation with the opposition forces to get it out. The sooner it gets, that discussion begins, the better, because, we need to have that law passed by the time the evaluators knock on our doors, the FATF evaluators knock on our doors. There is a commitment, apart from being a member of FATF and to comply with the standards. There's also commitment, particularly by Argentina, Mexico, Brazil, as G20 countries, to get this done quickly. And unfortunately, we've been failing as a country, and this has created opportunities, huge opportunities for arbitrage as well. Certainly, the appeal for cryptocurrency in Argentina has largely been due to the instability of the peso itself and the high inflation rates. Argentines that once looked, only to the dollars or the euros for protecting their wealth are now also looking at crypto, as a means of wealth protection. Even in the crash of crypto that we've had this year, the losses have been, moderate vis-a-vis the loss of the peso compounded by inflation, in our country. So, I think the regulatory framework is important. Another ingredient to take into consideration here, and which I think is somewhat contradictory to what I've been saying, is that the IMF, Argentina has an IMF package. It entered into a new arrangement with the IMF in March of this year, and the IMF has unfortunately included a pledge or demanded a pledge from Argentina in the package to discourage the use of cryptocurrencies with a view to preventing money laundering, informality, and disintermediation. I say this with high regrets because I used to work for the IMF, and I think, unfortunately, the vision of the fund, and I know this kind of pledges are being solicited from countries in other jurisdictions as well, reveals some need for fund staff to really get into it and educate themselves a little bit more about cryptocurrencies and their potential also for enhancing the protection of financial integrity.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Those insights are really amazing and very sort of, you're uniquely positioned there. Celeste, all right. I mean, enough policy. Let's talk compliance, right? So listen, I have a bunch of questions for you, but quite frankly, like, let's just kind of, there's so many great questions in the chat. I think really this all goes to, how are you thinking about compliance at Bitso today? And I think that what that really means is, how do you think about compliance when there's sort of a lack of clear regulatory, there's a lack of regulatory clarity, but also sort of, yeah, like, you know, you said you want to provide a safe environment for your business to operate, for people to engage with Bitso, to people to engage with digital assets in Argentina and across Latin America and the world. Let's talk us through, and some of those, you know, again, questions here around travel rule. What are the main challenges you're facing? And really a lack of clarity. So answer that how you like, and I'm happy to dig in as we go along.
Do I have a full hour for me or what?
Yeah, starting now. All right.
So first of all, going, you know, to your initial question, like, how do you go about a compliance program in the crypto industry? Because we don't really have clear regulation. We are just adopting the closest regulation that we have, you know, in terms of AML and controls. But coming from a financial services background, and also from the regulator, you know, in my experience, we had to work with this kind of traditional financial services approach, but making the appropriate changes or adjustments to a new and like daily changing world. Products, services, you know, like, it is changing so fast, and everything is changing so fast in this industry. So our compliance model has to have this into consideration, no? And having said this, of course, I mean, we as a crypto exchange and as a local subsidiary, we comply, you know, with the whole drill of compliance, you know. And I'm not going to go into depth of all the items that we already are super familiarized with, but, you know, we have risk management policies, we have like manuals and procedures, we have risk-based approach due diligence, local KYC, PEP screening, sanction screening. We have biometric validation due to local requirements, which we carry out for all of our users. Like, no, it doesn't matter which level you're in or what operational or transactional profile you have, we do our screening and our biometric validation to all of our users. And then I think one of the most important pieces that is the big change regarding this industry in terms of what we've been doing in the traditional financial services system is that the beauty of the blockchain is that pretty much everything, I'm not going to say everything because we know that it's not the case, but pretty much everything is traceable, you know? So having to add this this layer of KYT, of knowing your transaction, as well as knowing your customer in the traditional way, I think it is the not the biggest challenge, but the biggest difference, I would say, with what we've been doing in the past. And I think our mission here is to explain this to the world, because the world is still not familiarized with this piece of the exchanges and of the crypto part of compliance. Because in terms of security and of traceability, this is a main difference with the part that has to do with, let's say, dealing with cash. Like, in terms of cash, you don't have the traceability that the blockchain has. So I think this is a huge piece, a huge difference in our compliance programs. And you know, we've been trying and going out there and explaining it to all of our partners. And also, I've seen that there has been some questions about the travel rules. So I cannot speak about this in terms of like regional adoption, but that we are fully compliant with the travel rule already. We have implemented the travel rule, and of course, it's a kind of a change in the way the crypto transactions have been done. But this is what the FATF controls have reached, and I'm very glad with it. Yeah, and then I think to go back to your question briefly in terms of like what are the main challenges. I mean, I can think about a million challenges, but I think in terms of being global companies, we do have very important, like very big challenges in terms of like dealing with very different regulations in very different jurisdictions with different cultures. So this translates to the fact that we have to deal with a customer that is probably not used to complying with different laws. Let's say, so we are a local subsidiary that also has to comply with European laws because we have our holding company in Europe. So we have to be bound by both standards. And then in some cases, you have to be asking for documentation or for standards that the local customers are not really used to. So it's a process, of also educating our users. So it's internal and external education,
That's an awesome answer. And there's one more that just popped in, which I think goes right to your point. And that is sort of, in Europe, they're moving towards this sort of MiCA framework, the market in crypto assets legislation that basically provides a passportable license amongst 30-ish member states. I think the question is really sort of, how do you deal with the fact that, across Latin America, you're dealing with all of these fragmented and I think it goes to a lot of what you've said already, but sort of like just maybe quickly speak to sort of how do you comply across all of these varying frameworks?
So I guess this goes to like communication, constant communication amongst all the compliance officers. We have a super robust team that is like all aligned, but I think it's really key to have everyone on the same page and have everyone collaborating. And it is a challenge in our daily work, because we have to work in like making compatible all of our regulations. But sometimes, we have to kind of meet in the middle and reach a balance between the tropicalization of the products and of the compliance processes and having an efficient process. So I guess I don't know if that's the right answer, but it's kind of what works for us.
It's the real practical answer, which is really what I was hoping for. Look, I mean, I think what you're saying here, and it's so well said, is that the greatest quality of crypto and blockchains is this cross-border value transfer at the speed of the internet, right? This borderless ability to move funds, but also it's the biggest challenge because it's very hard to move funds for compliance because you're dealing with global regulators, jurisdictional arbitrage, all of these sort of issues that just really complicate the compliance process. And obviously something that we're focused on, pretty much 24/7 at TRM to provide you the tools that you need to make these kinds of determinations. Eric, one thing that we're seeing here as regulators are trying to grapple with how to regulate and then how to ensure compliance is this idea of sort of sandboxes and I know Colombia is doing a lot of work in that space. And it seems to me that sandboxes have become a really go-to tool for regulators as they're trying to build this out, because even as long as we've been talking about this, it's still pretty early. So would you talk a little bit about your experiences working with sort of regulators in that sort of sandbox type of context?
Of course, Harry. The sandbox format is, in a sense, is positive to maintain the balance between the role of the supervisor and regulator and allow the development of the industry, mainly in technology matters, especially understanding that technology is moving faster than regulation. Let us remember that the pilot developed in Colombia by the supervisor is for supervision, not regulation. Therefore, the objective is the understanding by the supervisor and the supervised entities. However, it is also important to highlight that the crypto exchange have supported this initiative to achieve legal clarity on the activity and its free connection with the financial services. And on this point, the state has a debt with them. The draft circular, or that is a special regulation here in Colombia, is a secondary regulation. The draft circular of the financial supervisor here in Colombia that closed for comments on August 12th of this year had the purpose of ending the debate on the other letters or other special regulation that imposed restrictions on supervised entities. However, we have already waited for almost a year now, and it's not passed, creating an environment of uncertain and generating decisions by some financial entities to restrict operations related to crypto activity. This is a setback, and there is an urgent need to pay the debt with crypto players who have contributed to formalization with information adoption and good practices, and the willingness to build guidelines for the development of crypto market here in Colombia.
Thank you so much for that. Mariano, a couple quick ones for you as we sort of move along. There's just so much to talk about today. Look, your role at K2 is really to advise clients in the region and globally on really kind of just what Celeste sort of laid out, and that is how should you think about compliance and understand regulation. Can you talk a little bit about how you are advising clients today as they're thinking about building a business or building out a compliance function in Latin America, really, I'd say kind of writ large?
Sure. So, Ari, our firm provides crypto and digital asset solutions to a wide range of clients in the region and across the world, I must say. Not only the private sector, but also public sector clients as well. When we work, I'll just mention it briefly about, when we work with jurisdictions, with the public sector, the idea is to help them ensure that the risks are duly understood. It's a risk management approach. This requires the conduct of the so-called virtual asset risk assessments, where the actual and prospective threats and the vulnerabilities of the jurisdiction are identified, analyzed, and evaluated. And I have to say, some jurisdictions in Latin America, not many, unfortunately, but some have begun to take this approach, of incorporating to their national risk assessments the virtual asset component. But I think it's fundamental, particularly when you're going to tackle the regulatory process, which many jurisdictions are embarking on. Although many are embarking on, there's a lot of movement, as we've been discussing, but not many have actually, kicked the ball into the goal. I know you like the sports analogies, Harry. So unfortunately, we're still waiting for a better consolidation. Now, with the private sector, the situation is slightly different. We work first of all, with the industry, with groups, collective groups, through thought leadership initiatives, mainly aimed at helping, advocate for smart regulatory frameworks, educating regulators on the safety features of digital assets, and ensuring they understand their potential also for financial integrity. We encourage the industry also to reach out to the public sector, to engage, ideally to establish public-private partnership arrangements, which I think are fundamental, particularly in this space, because the innovation is taking place at the private sector level, and the knowledge on how the technology works needs to be shared with the public sector to reach a common understanding of of what's going on and where the risks are.
Just to jump in there, I think that's exactly where Eric was sort of coming from with that really importance of that sort of that sandbox model, right?
The sandbox.
Yeah.
So, when we work individually with private sector clients, which I think was what your question was aiming at more, we go back to the basics. That is emphasizing, on the importance of understanding the entity's risks in the ecosystem it is operating in, and developing a robust financial crimes compliance program that aimed at managing those risks. That's our approach. So we advise clients, in the design, the creation, the validation, and the implementation of financial crimes compliance programs to meet not only the existing regulatory frameworks and obligations, but to be forward-looking and anticipate, what could be coming. And we have, I think, an ability to anticipate what's coming. There are lots of hints in terms of what could be coming because we have an international standard, we have guidance that needs to be implemented by countries. So we can pretty much foresee where the regulatory process is going, and we have best practices of countries that are advancing the consolidation of regulatory frameworks more aggressively, like here in the United States. So, we try to bring, that advice forward to our clients. Of course, this involves, stepping up resources, creating the right internal structures to ensure that compliance not only, meets the current regulatory framework, but also the foreseen and anticipated ones. We basically prepare our clients not only to be compliant, but to excel in compliance. We like to say that. So to show the regulators that they're committed with compliance, to give comfort to the regulators that the risks are duly understood, they're mitigated, they're managed. This involves also a great amount of internal training with a top to bottom approach, to ensure that the entire organization is lined up with that commitment and with the knowledge of how to manage financial integrity risks.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. We're probably at the point where we need to do a lightning round. This should have been a 6-part series on Latin America and crypto regulation, and we will be back to do more. There is a great question in here and says, is anyone going to speak about the plague of crypto fraudsters that are creating havoc in Latin America? And the reality is that's usually how we spend most of our time on TRM Talks, talking with law enforcement on how to track and trace and stop bad actors from really taking advantage of this ecosystem. And I think what I'd say to that is, we need to do a TRM Talks on sort of typologies and investigations in Latin America, and we'll put something like that together. I think the other piece is that sort of what we do at TRM is we work very closely with folks like Celeste and crypto businesses throughout the region to ensure that they have data to make sure that they're not transacting with bad actors. The other piece to this all is that I think crypto community, and Celeste talked about sort of the visibility and the unique ability to track and trace funds and do know your VASP type of, or know your transaction type of due diligence. Really, the community can also crowdsource a lot of the fraud and financial crime going on. We work with a bunch of partners in the space on something called chain abuse, where people can go and report fraud and financial crime globally. So really excited to do that. And it's a really great question. And again, usually it's where our focus is. Today it's on regulation in particular. Lightning round time. All right. I usually just sort of ask folks to sort of just talk about anything, but I think that like we have such specific subject matter expertise. Eric, let me talk with you for a second. Like, I think you're very much at the cusp of thinking about like what comes next in terms of regulation. What are your thoughts on sort of where things are headed? Right, we're at that sandbox stage right now in Colombia. What's next? Where do we go from here?
Okay, I think that the trend is identifying how to use crypto in our daily lives. For example, how migrants send money via crypto, or how we can create NFTs to represent real estate rights. It's no longer an exchange of money as it could happen with the more traditional market of Bitcoin or Ether. Now we are finding solution to everyday life with the use of crypto, all leveraged by blockchain technology. The interest here in Colombia is with the decentralized finance, DeFi, and this increased dramatically during the pandemic, since decentralized finance aims to transform traditional forms of finance by rebuilding and reinventing service. And we have a very, very, very nice future.
Thank you so much. Yeah, no, that's I love that answer, and I think it really goes to the fact that it is still early, right? We're at the very beginning of the match here, Mariano, for my sports analogies, right? We're not even in the end of the first half. Mariano, to you now, it's almost like every day, and this is why we don't sleep anymore, right? I see something else happening, and it's not just sort of in the global crypto space, it's really in Latin America specifically. I just read a piece yesterday on
Mexico,
the growth of remittances in Mexico, right? Like and this is happening every single day. What are you thinking about? What is top of mind for you right now as you're thinking about sort of the region or Argentina, Brazil, more specifically?
Yeah, I think, there's definitely news coming out every day, but what I'm not seeing, what I would have liked to see by now, is a more strategic approach, similar to what we're seeing here in the United States, with a roadmap laid out by the president and agencies working in coordination to consolidate a regulatory framework across the board. That's something that's still to come, I think, in Latin America. Hopefully the experience of the US will also, serve as a model for Latin American jurisdictions to replicate, because these regulatory developments have to be tackled with a more strategic approach. So, I don't know what's next, but I do know what should be next, which is, countries should definitely, work towards identifying and assessing the risks for money laundering, terrorist financing that are emerging from virtual asset activities and operations with VASPs. That's a requirement under the FATF standard, recommendation 1. They should ensure that VASPs are licensed or registered. They have to have laws requiring licensing or registration. They have to be able to take action to identify the natural or the legal persons that carry out VASP activities. They have to have a supervisory framework developed for monitoring and supervising transactions of VASPs. And FIUs have to have the ability to receive suspicious activity reports from VASPs, and that requires an amendment of the statutes in most of the jurisdictions. Until that happens, the ability to really investigate, trace, and detect money laundering, suspicious of money laundering in transactions is really is really challenging. So I hope that the process speeds up. I mean, it's understandable at the very beginning, the standard was being developed, guidance was being put forward. It wasn't until last year, that we had the final FATF guidance, on how to incorporate the risk-based approach to the legislation and regulation of virtual assets and virtual asset service providers. But now we have it. Now we have all the tools that are necessary to get the job done. So I hope, this requires political will, political commitment, working together among political forces to pass those laws, to pass those regulations, and then, to start implementing them.
What I've learned today is that this needs to be the first in a series where we tackle Brazil, Mexico, financial crime, a whole bunch of other sort of interesting issues across Latin America. So maybe that's really my big takeaway from today. Celeste, I'm going to let you drop the mic here on this. There was a really smart question from our friend Crystal in the chat around sort of like, navigating regulation is sort of one thing, and changing regulation, but also there's just so much you don't know out there. How do you think about, when you're thinking about compliance, sort of trying to learn more about what you don't know, trying to mitigate those risks that are out there, and really thinking. I mean, like, look, I have so much admiration for what you do, because you really are the tip of the spear when it comes to stopping the fraud and financial crime out there. But there's also a lot of pressure around that. How are you best thinking about, like, you know, the I don't know, the belts and suspenders, being a shield really out there, but really knowing what you don't know?
Oh, Crystal, you put me in the spot here. I guess the response to that is that we need to be constantly learning and constantly training our teams, being at the top, of what are the last products. So I personally, on my phone, download all of the apps that I can. I test them, I use them. So being a user, that's a great tip for compliance officers. Like, use your different apps, transact, use the functionalities that the financial services crypto industry has for you. So I think that's the best way you have to learn. And also, I think creating interdisciplinary teams, having different backgrounds in the teams is a very, very good way to going about this.
Awesome answer to a super tough question. I am so honored that the three of you joined us today for TRM Talks. Thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. You are all part of helping us build a safer financial system at TRM, and it's really an honor to have you, come to these. November 3rd, OFAC sanctions compliance. It's going to be awesome. Please sign up for that. Check us out on Spotify and Apple Music, which I can't believe I actually get to say. That is crazy. And just really, really, really. Thank you so much for spending time with us, Mariano, Eric, Celeste. Really grateful for your expertise.